check, 1, 2. Check, 3, 4. Check, 1, 2. There's a 27-second delay. In the room. This will be interesting. All right. Let's do it. Keyboard. All right, guys, if everybody's ready, let's go and start to head in. We're not doing music today. What's up, Gabby? Long time no see. Hannah, how you doing? Good evening.
It was like hailing, started snowing all the way. I was like, I'm about to turn around without snow tires.
Bro, it was bad out there for a bit. Good evening, good evening, good evening. What's up?
Did you still want me to?
Not today. I do want you to, not today, yeah. Sorry, dude. I was actually thinking next week if you're still down.
Sounds good.
All right. For those of you guys who are watching online, welcome. We're just letting our group get seated.
Can the people online
We muted the mics, so they should be able to only hear you if you're talking into my mic. So somewhat.
So I have to walk up onto the stage?
Yeah, exactly. If you have something to confess, I'll just lean in.
On Sundays we can hear the babies. I feel like they can hear us.
It's very possible. If you turn on your phone and just go to the church live stream, in like 27 seconds, we'll know. That's the delay.
Turn up all the way on the phone, your microphone.
Exactly.
Start a loop.
Just feedback. All right, those who are watching online, guys, just want to let you know we're just going to keep it to graphics because we have a room of young people, and there's nothing more awkward than your mom being like, remember when you sat in that study? So we're just going to let them be. So guys, good evening. We're going to be talking about lust tonight. How many of us knew this coming in? Welcome everyone else. Let's start off with a little bit of a reason why we're talking about this. Okay, guys? Number one, this is like a really major sin that has taken hold of our society. Okay? Our society isn't exactly killing it with taking large leaps forward, morally really in any area, but we are also statistically more chained to this one than anywhere else. And I don't think we talk about that a ton, and we don't talk about the other things surrounding it, okay? So before we get into this message, I want to warn you guys that we'll be talking about pornography. We'll be talking about masturbation, about cheating on your spouse, and about sex in general, okay? This is not going to be that high school camp message where lust and pornography are just synonymous, and that's like the same thing. We're just using a nice code word. All right, we want to flesh this subject out a lot more. This is not going to be as tame as those high school messages. All right, so for that reason, I'm going to ask a favor. Because when I used to do messages like this back at BCH, I would always joke about like I was going to get fired. That was like the end result of like, hey, they hear about this, that's not what we're playing with anymore. All right? We're a church now. We're doing our own thing, which means that this has the potential to impact our viewership online and people who even attend this church. Because this is being live streamed, this is being recorded, and we're not going to make it private at any point. All right? So we're taking a stand on this. So do me a favor. Make sure we're listening. Okay? If you guys have questions, ask them. We're live streaming right now. We're going to shut off the live stream once the message is done. So if you guys have questions that are a little bit more specific, they're not going to be online, but this is going to be something that, again, we want to take more seriously as we do it together, all right? So, find yourself tuning out. Tell someone else to punch you. We'll go through it, all right? Let's start with our first slide, guys, which is a very easy question, I think, for most of us to answer. And it's not clicked on that. Hannah, can you go click on the slides? I'm so sorry. Thank you. I mean, there could be any Hannah, not Smith in particular. Those online could be any Hannah at all. We cannot, you'll never be able to legally prove that it was Hannah Smith here. Just click the next slide, yeah, and that should be perfect. Thank you. Let's see if that works. Great. We're going to open up with a question. Is lust wrong? Is lust wrong, right? Some people hold to a philosophy that I can look so long as I don't touch. And they treat this area kind of like an antique store with a child, right? Mom says, look with your eyes, not your hands. And so we're like, well, that kind of seems to fit here. I'm just going to imagine, I'm just going to be, kind of eyeballing, but I'm not going to touch, right? And this kind of gave rise to one of those phrases that I hear from some people, which is, who cares where you start the engine, so long as you park in the right garage. They're going, it doesn't matter what I'm lusting after, what I do, so long as I don't actually cheat on my spouse, right? This would be a dude talking here. And I've heard that from Christian mouths, and even Christian couples say they watch pornography together to spice up their sex life. So we need to start here. This seems simple, but we do need to ask this question: is lust wrong? And let's build a biblical case. Adultery, of course, is named as a sin amongst the 10 Commandments. So for us, that's a really easy starting point to say, of course, that is wrong. But what about lust? Jesus in Matthew chapter 5, verse 28 tells us, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Sorry, I was slow on the slide there. What does that mean? It means God never said, look but don't touch. He never said that was a different thing and it's okay. It means that God looks at this and doesn't just see the consequence of the action. He doesn't just see what will happen, what kind of things you'll suffer if you decide to touch rather than look. In the eyes of God, lust is not innocent. It's inherently sinful and is misused when you look at people and assign sexual feelings towards them that are devoid of marital commitment. Spiritually, looking and touching are the same wrong in the eyes of God. Theologically speaking, James chapter 1, verse 14 and 15 gives us something else to think about. It says, but each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desires and enticed. It says, then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. In other words, lust doesn't remain just lust. Oh, spoilers. Lust doesn't remain just lust. It can grow and poison. That is what makes lust so dangerous. It is a private sin that can easily remain unchecked and quietly destroy your relationships, destroy your impulse control, and enslave you. All right? Let's go over some statistics. Right now, we know that about 70% of the male population of the U.S. watches porn annually. Annually. That does not have to be the same 70%, meaning this impacts a larger group of our community. This is also 70% who want to admit it. All right? 70%. We also know this affects 40% of women as well. What's even scarier than that is the fact that these numbers are higher in teenagers. About 93% of teenage boys have been exposed to pornography, and 62% in girls. Sorry, 93, yeah. Meaning that there's a very, very small portion of our population who has not had firsthand experience with this. And right now, again, admitted, about 97.4% of the male population, 82.7% of the female population have been exposed to porn at some point in their lives. So statistically speaking, guys, in this room, everyone. Everyone. All right? We should not look inside and be like, oh my goodness. I might be the only one. No, there's almost no chance. Okay, guys, I would say statistically, there's no chance that you're the only person in this room who's had to deal with this. And that also means statistically, there's probably multiple of us that are addicted to this, especially when you throw on the live stream. Okay, this is not a topic that's like far off and academic. This is something that we don't want to raise our hands and admit to, but this is something that's impacting us as a group and us as a generation right now. This is also numbers that are just in the U.S., and the U.S. is not alone in this epidemic. Globally, numbers are harder to pin down in some countries or to try to determine what percentage of the population is affected. There is, however, a number that shows us how prolific porn is globally, which comes from a popular online source who reported that they had about 80,000 visitors in 2019. This is only one porn site. 80,000 per minute. For the year of 2019. 80,000 per minute, guys. One site. Not all of them. One site. 4% of the internet is pornography sites, okay? But about 25% of the traffic at any given time. It's wild. Pornography accounts for more traffic during certain parts of the day than Netflix does. Think about that. In fact, porn viewership on one prominent site jumped 11.6%. You guys remember what happened in March 2019? Who knows? Lockdowns, COVID. I'm sorry. No. Wait. I'm pretty sure it was 2019, my friend. Was it 2020? I don't think so, because this was on our site. I'm Googling this right now, dude. I'm Googling this right now because this was in it, unless I got the year wrong on the thing. But no, I don't think so. Let me see. No, you're right, 2020. Thank you. So I put the graphic in the wrong. I'm sorry, guys. Because this was on a research about the lockdowns. So, my mistake. They had a jump, though, pre-lockdown to post-lockdown of 11.6%. They said from the month that everyone was free to the month that everyone got locked down, we had a huge jump because people had time. They also give the following numbers for growth, which is, again, kind of crazy. They talk about an annual growth here. 2016, 2017, they said that there was about 23 billion people, again, one site, jumped to 28. It was a 5.5 billion jump. The next year, 2018, 33.5, about a 5 billion jump. The next one, 2019, a 42 billion viewership. And this is not just visitors, as in person by person. This is visits to the site, which was a jump of 8.5 billion, the biggest leap that had been there, right? This shows a gradual increase of our society who's slowly being eaten by something, right? And then this site stopped reporting. In 2023, finally get another number emerged because 2020, 2021, 2022, we didn't have them. 2023, we're almost at 70 billion. What's scary about this is that means if you average it out, we had about a 7.9 billion view growth every year after that point. Our society is either becoming more widespread in its exposure to this, or our society is becoming more desperately dependent on it, or both, by these numbers. Meaning that this is not something that's slowing down for us, this is something that is accelerating. This is something that is not just plateauing. This is something that people are becoming more addicted to, again, by number, by different people, and also more deeply, because this is views, meaning you're going back to the site and going back to the site and going back to the site. Let's put that in perspective as well, guys. 70 billion clicks, 70 billion searches that ended at this site, right? What's the population of Earth? About 8 billion? 70 billion. That means if everyone on Earth decided that they were going to click on this site, they'd have to do so about 9 times to justify this number. And that is women and children and the elderly and blind people who are probably not the customers for the site, right? What's also scary is that during this time we also saw a dramatic rise in cheating. That kind of coincides with the jump that we saw in the viewing of pornography, because as we mentioned before, lust destroys relationships. And in a recent study, we found out that about 15% of couples dealt with infidelity or cheating in their relationship in 2018. In 2023, it's about 25%. If you look at the years in between, it's a gradual but steady climb. of about 1% a year, which is wild. All right? It jumped up a couple of points over a couple of different years. What's funny to me is also that this is before and after COVID for us. You think that there would be a dip somewhere in there because of the lockdowns, right? So you go, okay, people are watching more porn, but of course they're locked inside. But then you'd also probably guess that cheating goes down because, well, they're locked inside, right? No. We were watching more porn and we were still cheating our spouses at a higher rate at the same time. And again, we're now sitting at the highest percentage ever of infidelity within relationships. And this is also not limited to the youth, which is kind of scary. Do you guys know what the number one age is for women who cheat? Where the spike occurs? Who wants to take a guess for me?
34.
34. Higher.
40.
Huh?
45.
45 higher.
60.
50. And it maintains through the 60s. And then it dips at the 70s to a much lower rate. You guys want to guess at what number men spike at? 18. Actually, believe it or not, women under the age of 30 more likely to cheat on their partner than men under the age of 30. So, not just a men thing. So who wants to guess where men spiked? Age 50. The same age. Age 50. The only difference is that men never go down after that point. They stop charting at 80, and men are still cheating at a high rate at 80 plus. The women just, dudes never stopped, never quit the game. Which highlights something else for us, guys. Lust doesn't dissipate. This doesn't go away. This is painted as a high school topic. It's not. This is a lifetime topic. In fact, what this really shows us is the fact that lust doesn't even, again, plateau in our hearts. It continues to build, right? How many of us know that if you take a small dose of poison, there's going to be bad effects, but it won't kill you? But at some point of being poisoned over and over and over again with something your body cannot adapt to, what happens? What happens when there's a buildup of lead, right? Or other heavy metals in your body? What happens? You start to suffer ill effects until you die, right? Here it appears that there's a buildup where it eventually hit kind of critical mass at about apparently 50 for most people, where just you kind of lose control here. And you start to engage in actions that you shouldn't. So this is not something that we look at as young people and go, well, just grow out of it. This is something that we're going to struggle with for the rest of our lives, and this is going to be something our society struggles with for the rest of their lives. I also want to make sure that we're not getting it twisted. Again, lust is not a word synonymous only with porn. That is not a code word that makes it kosher. All right, lust comes in a lot of forms. I feel like the church does a really good job on focusing on the fact that porn is wrong. But guess what? They're not alone in that. Please, Miss Nameless Person, what do you have to say?
Is this talking about just physically cheating, or is it also talking about emotionally?
This is only physical. They only quantified it by you had intercourse with someone who wasn't your spouse, or you had physical, sexual, actions. So this is not, I caught him talking on the phone to another woman. This is cheating. This is going to be, they went too far. All right? Like I said, this is not just a porn issue. It shows itself in a lot of different ways. All right? Porn is one version that is very popular, and again, our society is kind of turning against it right now. It was funny that in 2020 that site stopped reporting because I think it was just starting to get too prolific. They're like, we don't necessarily want to own up to what's going on. Because at that time, too, we also have people like Terry Crews coming out being like, dude, don't do it, it's terrible. Right? More recently, Billie Eilish comes up and she's like, this is awful. Our society is starting to get the hint that this is a bad thing. We're not going to touch on like sex slavery and things that connect to the porn industry, all right, tonight? But a lot of this stuff has come to light to just like, this is terrible. Adult stars have terribly short lifespans. They're riddled with mental illness, addictions to different narcotics and things like that. Like, this industry only does one thing: kill. That's all it does. The viewers, the people involved, it doesn't make people rich, happy, and old. It makes people dead. And if you're in front of the camera dealing with this closely, I'm sure there's some people behind the scenes who are financially making this possible, who are benefiting greatly. You also want to know something crazy about the numbers for this before we move on? The porn industry makes about the same amount of money right now, when last measured, as the NCAA. Not just football, like any collegiate sport. That money, when it's pooled together, matches the output of like the porn industry annually. That's nuts to me. All right, so we're not just like sitting here looking at something and we're like, if we shut down one site, we're good. No, there's too much money in it, okay? Especially when you recognize that a lot of the services they render are free. This is ad revenue because there's so many clicks. This is traffic money, all right? But in addition to that, there's other forms that this takes place in, right? Ladies, if I may ask you a question, and I'm sorry, this is just the day, so we're going to be a little bit crazy. Would you feel better if you found out your boyfriend was watching porn but then switched to something else, your husband, your fiance, whatever it is? They decided that they're now just going to call a sex hotline. And that's going to be a thing, because we don't want to look at things and lust after them. We're just going to listen to them. Would that feel better to you? Yes? No? Hand raise for yes. Hand raise for no. Those who cannot see the room, all I'm seeing are hand raises that say no, and they're very sheepish. That doesn't make it better. Why? Lust is not just of the eyes. Lust is not just watching sex acts. Lust is something of the heart, right? Guys, how many of us would be super cool if our girlfriend, fiance, wife is on the phone talking to some dude, just absolutely flirting with him? But she's like, but don't worry, we're never going to be close enough to actually cheat. It's okay. How many of us would not like that? Not like that. Okay, every hand just went up. Awesome, for those online. Some were more sheepish, some were pretty convicted. You wouldn't want that. Why? There's an emotional bond being formed. There's an emotional connection being formed that has a sexual motivation. We don't want that to happen because that is for us. That's the beauty of a monogamous relationship, right? Lust is sexual and emotional longing. You don't want your spouse to be forming that connection, your girlfriend, your fiance to be forming that connection with anyone else, and neither does God. There's another form, however, that kind of goes more unspoken against, or just more not talked about. It's not that people don't condemn it, they just don't really talk about it at all, and it's becoming an emerging market. Another one that lust is really big in. Do you guys want to guess what it is? Yes, literature. Who knows that we've had a boom in what is often called smut, erotic novels? This is something that churches aren't really talking about, because guess what? There was this whole outrage about one novel that was, erotic, and then it just kind of died away as if this doesn't still happen. That's not good for us. And you know what? We'll pay attention to that novel in particular because the numbers are pretty easy to get a hold of. But this is something that has a growing market in the United States. So let me ask you guys, who knows what the best-selling book in history is?
The Bible.
It's the Bible. Do you know what the best-selling book in the U.S. between the years 2010 and 2019 were?
50 Shades of Grey.
It was 50 Shades of Grey, guys. Do you want to know what the second place was? What do you think second place was? Any guesses?
The Bible.
No, it was not the Bible. It was 50 Shades of Grey 2. Who wants to guess what the third place was? There is a third book, and it was number 3. Who wants to guess what number 4 is? Hunger Games. At its height. These are the 2010s, guys. A bunch of us were whistling with 3 fingers up, okay? And it could not crack the sales of 50 Shades of Grey 1, 2, or 3, and it wasn't close. Guys, these novels suck. All right? Can I read you some lines about how well this book is written? Let's just read some of the gems that just paint colorful language for us so we can understand what's going on. I'm going to give you guys 3 quotes, all right? Number 1, the elevator whisks me with terminal velocity to the 20th floor. That's a terribly written sentence. Who knows what terminal velocity is? Not good. Not good at all. She died at the 12th floor, apparently. How about this one? I must be the color of the Communist Manifesto. That's quite the sentence. We have another one. I'm sorry, guys, this one's a bit more graphic. It says, grabbing it quickly, I squirted toothpaste on it and brushed my teeth. In double quick time, I feel so naughty, it's such a thrill. She's brushing her teeth, okay? What the heck is that writing? We are not consuming this for the sake of a good read, okay? We're not reading this because it's stirring and just like, I want to be as well written as this author, right? As well worded as this great wordsmith. We're reading it because it graphically describes sex acts. As badly written as the connective sections are, the smuttiness of the bedroom scenes rev our sex drives. Again, men dominate porn viewership with a 40-70 split, which sometimes leads us to believe that lust is a primarily male issue, but women wake up about 75% of the audience of 50 Shades of Grey, which was about 11.4 million women based on purchases of the book just in the U.S. Another shocking statistic is that about 55% of these women are under 30, meaning this is an emerging market. Women are not devoid of lust, it just rears its head up differently. And again, when we think of 50 Shades of Grey, I think of The Office, because there's an episode where like Phyllis is like taking it in and it's just like, ah. We think about like nasty old women locked up somewhere, right? Or they're just like housebound and it must be some lady in a wheelchair who's just like fantasizing. It's not. When we think porn addicts, we think of like that 400-pound weeaboo dude with like Dorito dust on his shirt. It's not. This is very real for us as a demographic, guys. And again, we don't see the same condemnation from our society about smut as we do porn, which makes it arguably more dangerous. Because if I shouldn't be watching things that excite me sexually or listening over the phone to things that sexually excite me, guess what? It's no better in print. And for some of us, again, churches preached against porn, preached against unfaithfulness in relationships, and stood up vocally against this novel in particular, like 50 Shades of Grey. But we fell short in some other ways. So let me ask you guys, we started our time with a question. There's the quotes. Is lust wrong? What would you guys say? How many think yes? Awesome. Let me give you the answer. No, it's not. It's misused. Lust, biblically, is not wrong between, say, spouses. I hope that I have a sexual longing for my spouse. I hope that I have a desire that pushes me towards her or him, right? What's the problem in the scripture that we read? Matthew chapter 5, verse 28. This is our misconceptions bit. These are the misconceptions sometimes the church holds. Matthew chapter 5, verse 28 said this, "But I tell you that if anyone looks at a woman lustfully, he has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Is that the person's wife? No, that's not their spouse. This is looking at someone who is not meant to be looked at in that way. This is somebody who does not have a connection to them that is within marital bonds, right? When God says, look and don't touch, what he's talking about here is about other people. We should not look and think that I'm fine if I don't touch. We should not be touching people that are not our husbands or our wives. It's not that lust is inherently wrong. It's inherently wrong when it's devoid of marital commitment, right? So it's not evil, it's misused. There's nothing wrong with, again, lusting after your spouse. The word in Matthew here means to long for or to covet or to set your heart upon. It speaks of focused passion. And even the word covet has been made kind of dirty, but the Bible says not to covet someone else's spouse in the Ten Commandments, not that you cannot covet yours. It says your neighbor's spouse or belongings. It never says that it is wrong for you to have that connection with your wife or husband. God even speaks of having a jealous heart for us, meaning he wants all of us. He wants exclusivity in our relationship with him. And we should want the same for our spouses. That's what the Bible demands for us, right? And this is where our study is going to kind of diverge just a little bit. Because again, the term lust here, what we describe with it, is usually nothing more than pornography. It needs to be bigger than that. And then when we understand that sexuality is not inherently wrong, it starts to color the argument differently again, all right? So stay with me. Is everyone okay? We're all right? Do I need to go through that again, or are we following? Okay, great. I'm not advocating for you to cheat on your spouse. I'm not advocating for lust to be a part of your daily interaction with anyone of the opposite gender or the same gender for that matter. I'm advocating for you to have a sexually active relationship with your spouse only, okay? Again, I doubt anyone in this room has not heard the message that porn is wrong from a high school group or from their parents. However, Christians are also really good at letting us know what they're against and really bad at letting us know what they're for, right? We see a lot of picketing. We see a lot of outrage. We don't often see a ton of in-depth teaching, especially on topics that make us blush. A bit of testimony here, guys. My generation, and maybe yours as well to a lesser degree, have been affected by one key authored source. Does anybody know a book that was written that really impacted dating from back in the 90s till even today? I talked to you about this, so I'm going to ask somebody else first. Nameless person. Does anyone have a guess? All right, nameless person, what book is it?
Isn't it like Dating Goodbye?
I Kiss Dating Goodbye. Yeah. I Kiss Dating Goodbye was a book written to teach about dating, and it was written by a guy named Joshua Harris. And this book is not totally evil, but it helped to popularize ideas like holding hands, kissing, or being alone even in public are all wrong until you're married. Can't hold a hand until you put a ring on it. You can't kiss your spouse until you're 100% your spouse. You can't hug unless it's a side hug. You can't other things like that. I'm not taking a stance on which of these are right or wrong in certain contexts. What I'm saying is that these are not scriptural. All right? Nowhere in the Bible says you can't hold the hand of someone. Right? I hold my children's hands. That is a pure bond thing. I hold hands of people I help off the ground who are 90. That has nothing to do with lust. The idea that you cannot hold hands with another individual extends itself past what is biblically there for us, right? And this book became incredibly popular in the Christian and conservative circles and helped to establish what we now call the purity culture most Christian kids grow up in. What is concerning about this is that Josh Harris wrote this book when he was only 21, and he wasn't married. And since then, he has renounced his book, and he divorced his wife, and he's fallen away from Christianity altogether. And yet, many people will think things like, hey, holding hands is wrong in a dating or engagement situation. And they don't really know where they got it from, but it's a lot of these roots trace back to this book and to this time when it was a huge surge of people going, this must be the right thing. How many of us have heard the phrase that you've given away a piece of your heart to someone other than your spouse? Yeah, that came from this. This pioneered that idea. It gave the picture of a man coming up to his fiancée and introducing her to 6 other girls saying, I gave away pieces of my heart that I can't give you now. That was never found in the Bible. That was found in an authored piece of literature, right? In fact, my relationship with my wife was affected by this book. I was raised to think that taking Allie to the movies without a third person present was harmful and was sinful. And my wife later told me that she was scared to look me in the eyes when we went on our first date due to the idea that it would promote lust. So for the entirety of the evening, she would look at me, and then if I looked up to meet her gaze, she would have to look away because she felt anything else would be sinful. What does that lead to, guys? That leads to a lot of relationships that suffer from the after effects of a standard set by a book they may have never even heard about. And it means that sexuality in the church morphed from something that God designed to something that was inherently shameful up until the moment you said, I do. It became dirty, and it became a topic that the churches largely fell silent on in any way other than condemning it. So let's remedy that a little bit, okay? Here's what we're going to talk about. Sex, biblically, all right? Calm down, gentlemen. God created most, if not all of you in this room, with the calling to marriage. And the church, again, has done a fabulous job of telling you some of what that requires. We have concepts like don't date or marry someone who isn't a Christian. And guess what? 2 Corinthians tells us this: do not be yoked together with unbelievers. For what do righteousness and wickedness have in common? Or what fellowship can light have with darkness? This isn't written exclusively to dating couples. This could be in a business relationship. This could be with your best friend that you're just open with everything about. You shouldn't have people that close in your life, though, who are the person you're counting on because they don't hold to the same standard of conviction or with the same goals in heart when they walk through life with you. But guess what? It's even more devastating in a relationship that's supposed to end in marriage because they will push you towards things that will not help you. Who knows biblically why God said not to marry women from other nations to the men of Israel? It was because they would drag their hearts away from worshiping the one true God into worshiping other idols. Okay, that's still true for us today. We learn that in marriage we have roles. Guys, big gulp on this one, but let's read Ephesians chapter 5. It says, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands, not men in general, not someone else's husband. Submit to your own husband as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. I want to point out, young men, this is not girlfriends. This is not fiancés. And in addition to that, it never said, men, make your wives submit. This is an act of love that a wife takes upon herself. And if she does not submit, the husband does not look over and go, aren't you forgetting something? Men, it says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. This word love is agape. Agape love is not sexual love. Agape love is not a sometimes love. Agape love is not love when they deserve it. Agape love is the love Jesus showed on the cross. It's when it's inconvenient at any cost, regardless of how you're treated. Women, this is not to look at your boyfriends, fiancés, or husbands and say, agape me, you're not doing good enough. Gentlemen, this is for you to take upon yourselves. Put up your big boy pants and understand that if your wife's being sassy, get over yourself and love her anyways. Okay? Verse 26. To make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body just as Christ does the church. Churches hit that one a lot, guys. This one's a lot of marriage counseling, right? They told us about this one. They also told us that sex outside of marriage or before marriage isn't good. 1 Corinthians lays it out. It says, but if they cannot control themselves, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. Guys, if your significant other is just too hot, you only have one choice. Put a ring on it. I hope we're talking about a believer and you've not allowed your heart to be conquered by someone that you know you shouldn't be hanging around with. But if you're in a godly relationship, college isn't a reason to wait if you're going to fall to lust. Education is not more important than purity. Neither is a job opportunity, anything else. If you're in a committed relationship that is God at its core and you feel as though sex is going to be an issue for you and sexual touch and lust, guys, it's time to marry in obedience to Christ, okay? Parents who are listening, I'm sorry I said what I said. Now let's talk about what churches don't say. They don't say that God has a plan for you to find the right person, stay sexually pure until that person marries you, and then once you're married, do what? They kind of leave it at that point, right? They say, okay, here's all the stuff to do. Stay pure, find the person God has for you, great, everything like that. And then and then get married. And then they just kind of stop off. Or they say something else. What do they tell everybody? Get married and have children. How? You left that part kind of gray. Biblically, you are to find the right person, marry the right person, and then do what? Who's brave enough to say it? Have lots of sex. See, you can say the word. I'm proud of you. Well done. Whew. Genesis chapter 1, verse 28 tells us what, guys? It says that God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. How do you increase in number? Anyone other than Cole?
Make more people.
How do you do it? Procreate. How do you procreate? You can say the word. Brian, I'm sorry. Person who could be any Brian. You could say the word, I promise. God's not going to strike you with lightning. It's not a dirty word. It appears in the Bible. The Bible says Jesus rode into Jerusalem on an, not donkey. All right? You're not going to hell for saying that word if you're reading the King James original. And guess what? Even the new ones say sex. Okay? It's not the end of the world. We need to get over this. And some people... Okay, I'm going to say this. So sex is the word, right? And if you're married, guys, and guess what? You're not having sex. What are you doing if God said to have sex? You're being disobedient. You're not listening to God. And again, some people are like, that's a jump. No, that's not. Some people look at this passage and go, that tells us to have children, not necessarily have a ton of sex. So children are the point, right? I had someone tell me, and they're not the only one. I've had lots of people tell me, you know what the point of sex is? To have children. Nothing else. The point of sex is procreation. That's it. So like you said, talk about procreation, right? It's true. It's part of it. It's not the only part. If you are barren, or as a man, if you cannot have children, does that mean you never have sex in a marriage? Because the point's not there? No. And you're not having sex believing that you're setting the floor for a miracle, because then that kid's going to justify all that hard work in the bedroom. Sex is okay, guys. Again, I'm not overstepping. Let's read 1 Corinthians chapter 7. The Bible says it. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife. Who knows what that is? Sex. Fathers provide for their daughters. So what's the marital duty a husband has? To please his wife. And likewise, the wife to her husband. Ladies, what's your job in a marriage? To have sex. The wife does not have the authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. Ladies, this is not a verse that means if he's in the mood, you have to. Because look at what comes next. In the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body. So he might go, hey, you're in the mood. And you're like, ha, you're not. It's the end of the conversation. He does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. Do not deprive each other, not of children, except perhaps by mutual consent, and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together, not have children, again so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Sex is good. Sex is holy. Sex is necessary. It's demanded in a marriage, and it is obedient service to God. All right? I don't know if you can log that as church time, but it's the next best thing. God desires you to have healthy marriages. And if you want to have a healthy marriage, you need to have a healthy sex life, which means that you have to have an active sex drive, which is impossible if you're always shaming yourself for lusting after your husband or wife in your hearts. It's okay to be horny. Just be horny for the right person. If we look at the trouble we have as single people, guys, and determine in our hearts that rather than learning to control our sex drive, that we should shame ourselves in order to kill it, because that's what many of us do, okay? We look at the job and we go, it's too hard. Many of us look at the task and go, I can't control it, therefore I'm just going to kill it. That's not a good alternative, and I'll tell you why. If we use shame to kill it, we will not be prepared for a healthy marriage. We will lack what is needed to serve our spouses. And we will carry those feelings of shame into our marriage bed. There's a heartbreaking phenomenon within Christian couples. Young Christian couples, I'll say in particular. They keep themselves sexually pure, praise God, amen. But they don't do it by self-control, they do it through shame. And then they get married, they stand up in front of everybody, they share their kiss, they get in a car, they drive to the hotel room, and everything from that point on goes worse. It goes really bad. There's so many stories of people who say, I regret that I didn't sleep around before marriage because when I got there, I didn't know what I was doing. And I felt like I was the problem. And that carried on for years. And when you get to a place where you're supposed to have sex with your spouse, and a woman feels like she's not able to meet the needs of her husband, what does it do to her self-esteem? It kills it. And what does it do to the man's self-esteem? He goes, clearly I'm not doing it right. I'm not what she wants. She looks at me and doesn't see what she needs. I'm failing. And both people walk away from this equation hurt, because rather than bringing something into submission in their lives, they killed it, and it was something that God never said to kill. Christians should not feel ashamed of being naked in front of their spouses or for being horny for their spouses. Christians should not feel ashamed of the thought of imagining their spouse naked. Christians should not aspire to seeing their spouses as nothing more than a really nice Christian roommate. The relationship is inherently different. Do you guys know what the quickest solution is to settle a dumb argument in a marriage? It's deciding to Netflix and chill, but skipping the Netflix. Ladies, do you know how to win arguments in a marriage? It's not what you think. I never said that. What I said was in my notes, argue without your shirt. Is that fighting dirty? Yes. But boy, does that give your husband motivation to be patient and kind. So praise God, you're helping him to live to God's glory in that moment. Gentlemen, practice talking dirty to your wives. It's not wrong. And if you get really good at it, they won't have to settle for reading, I must be the color of the Communist Manifesto in 50 Shades of Grey. All spouses should seek to be really, really good at sexually pleasing one another in healthy, biblical ways. Not because the Bible told you you have to, but because the Bible gave you this spouse to care for. So let's summarize what we've talked about thus far. Sex in marriage equals good. Lust for spouse equals good. It has to be monkey math, okay, guys? Being good at sex equals good, so long as you're practicing with your spouse. Shame about sex in marriage equals bad. Lust, not for your spouse, equals bad, which porn, smut, and cheating equal to, which is also bad. Now let's dive into the more practical things for those who are single and battling improper lust. And this ties over into married people as well, people in relationships, okay? But let's be honest here. Number one, you're not going to beat this alone, statistically speaking. All right, God moves. Miracles happen. But if you're going to try to quit smoking, it's the statistical odds that you're just never going to want one again or that it's going to be a battle. If you drink and get drunk a lot, is your plan just like, I'm just going to gut it out? Or do you need some people in your corner because you're going to struggle? It's that second one. The withdrawals are ugly. It doesn't matter how bad you want to quit lust. It doesn't matter how bad you feel about lust. You need help. Shame will not suffice. We just read a ton of stats about the fact that most of our population is sex addicted, lust addicted. And those stats do not change very much based on being a Christian, I'm sad to report. Those in a faith community do not do a ton better. Some do worse based on age. That is not going to be your saving grace. You need to understand that your feelings are not wrong, they're just misplaced. And you need people to talk to about what's going on. Because the number one thing that will keep you trapped in an addictive relationship with lust is keeping it private. All right? Why? Because privacy is sold to us in our own hearts as a safety net from the judgment of others. And guess what? It is. If people don't know, they can't judge you. If people don't know you're struggling, they can't look at you differently. That's fair. Yet at the same time, it also promotes shame. Shame that threatens you with thoughts like if they ever found out, they would fill in the blank. Or if a spouse or significant ever found out and you admitted to the fact that you struggle with watching porn, that they would leave you. That's what it becomes. What was once private for the sake of being kosher, not making people blush, becomes a thing that will kill you inside. And that shame will not ease up. The addiction does not go away after marriage. So you become a liar. You become a liar to your friends, you become a liar to your spouse, and you become powerless to change the fact that God isn't your master. Sexual addiction is. And I always tell this story, but it's true. You guys know what a men's retreat is? By show of hands, raise hands. You guys know what a men's retreat is? It's like a summer camp, but for dudes instead of high schoolers or junior highers, right? You go out for a couple days. You do Bible studies. Usually it's about something manly. You eat a couple meals, you play some basketball, swim, whatever. You come back as the boys. In my experiences with these men's retreats, there was always a moment that every one of these camps shared. We'd get in, and after the second day, because the first day you just get there and you unload and unpack everything. The second day you'd come in, they'd have a couple of good messages. You'd get into the groove of hanging out with the boys. You'd eat some good meat-based meals. And they'd come together around a campfire, and they call it an afterglow. And someone would play a guitar, and you'd worship together, and you'd be all arm in arm, and everyone's chummy and getting along. And then they'd stop and say, is there anything anyone wants to ask prayer for? And the first dude raises his hand, everyone looks over and he goes, I don't read my Bible enough. I read my Bible, just not enough. Can you pray for me? And everyone goes, oh yeah, we'll pray for you. And some other guy puts his hand and goes, I need to be a better husband. Everyone goes, oh yeah, absolutely, we'll pray for that one. And then there's always that one guy in the corner who's just like breaking down. He's not holding it together. He's crying again in front of all the boys. Not the thing you're supposed to do. He's a mess, right? He hits his knees at some point during one of the songs and he wails out maybe. And then the next time they ask, is there anything you want prayer for? He raises his hand. He is shaking, right? And with a shaking voice, he says, I am struggling with lust. And he's convinced that in this camp of like 200 dudes, he's the only one. And so it's been eating him up, but he's the guy who breaks through the wall. He's the bloodied one with all the shame first through that brick wall. And he says, I'm doing this. And everyone looks at him with compassion. And then suddenly they look at each other and recognize that everyone's looking at him with compassion. And then the second dude says, me too, brother. I haven't had the strength to admit it. And then suddenly most of the hands are up. Because again, statistically, of course they are. And one by one, these men understand that they're not alone in the fight. They were never alone in the fight. Every Sunday morning when they came to church, they were surrounded by people struggling with the same thing. But each of them struggled silently out of fear that everyone else would cannibalize them. But when you put a bunch of grown boys out in the woods together, and one dude's brave enough to crack and let that mask fall just a little bit, everyone else gets to heal. Because they're all struggling with the same battle. We need to have those moments in our lives, guys. Okay? Don't hold it inside. You're not going to win. You're just going to lie to your spouse if God blesses you one. You're just going to lie to your pastor in your church. You're just going to lie to the people who have the ability to help you, who might be struggling with the same thing and need your help. You're going to lie to someone whose testimony is that they went through the same thing, maybe at the same age or even in uglier ways than you did. And they have ways for you to have victory, that they found victory in. And they have people that they've already talked to and networked with that they want to connect you with so that you can overcome it. Don't sit quietly and allow yourself to be eaten alive. It's going to take one brave person. It's going to take one brave person a couple different times. Be that brave person if you're willing to. And if not, look for those people who are brave enough to admit that they're not perfect in your life and attach yourself to them and find a good time to spill your guts. Number 2. Let's talk about winning. What does beating this addiction mean? What does winning against lusts? What does it mean that you've won the battle against lust? 2 Corinthians 10:5 gives us that picture. It says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. Here's the most famous part. It says that we take every thought, right? We take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. The truth is that beating lust, is not simply killing every horny feeling or every thought about having sex. Let me ask you, if we sent soldiers out into a battlefield and we told them capture the enemy and they gunned everyone down, did they do their job right? Why? What does capture mean? Does it mean gun everyone down? No. What does it mean? It means bring into submission, dominate, bend to your will, not erase, not eradicate, not make extinct, not put 6 feet in the ground. It means to have control over them. So if you were ordered to go take people captive and you gun them down, you know what you've done? It's called a war crime. You did not need to do that. You stepped too far and did damage. In this case, right, of not only taking captive but murdering, we as Christians overstep from taking our thoughts captive to killing what God has given us, that God-given sex drive. AKA, we damage ourselves. Your end goal as a Christian is not to erase any sexual urges or thoughts from your brain. It is to dominate them. It is that you control them and they do not control you. Girls, if you find yourself staring into your boyfriend's eyes with intense desire, don't kill yourself over it. That's a good thing if he's one day going to be your husband. However, since he is not yet, you need to get a grip, all right? Change the setting. Take him ring shopping and drop hints. It's not wrong that you feel that. It's going to be wrong if you vent it in an incorrect way. Gentlemen, if your girl is looking a little too thick. It's true. All right? And has you ready to risk it all. Excuse yourself. Call up one of the boys until it passes. Or remind yourself that it's fine as she is. You are called in 1 Timothy 5, chapter 5, verse 2, to treat, quote, older women as mothers and younger women as sisters with absolute purity. Not your wife, other women, right? I include that older women part because some of you like to go big game hunting. More power to you. But the truth is, brutally, that you're not going to fill up your mother or your sister. So you should not be allowing that impulse to control you to doing that towards another woman who is not your wife. You can feel that impulse. That's a good impulse. You're going to need it. And I hope that your girl makes you act up. As soon as you're married, though. But until then, you got to hold the line and take those things captive. Other sets of good ideas, good guidelines might include don't be in each other's rooms alone. It's hard to be seductive at Fred Meyer's. Change the setting, okay? Or don't be in a group of people who are going to encourage you in that direction. Surround yourself with people who understand that you're trying to serve Jesus. It makes being horny way more awkward. And again, good friends go a long way. Now, finally, we get to talk about something. It's our last bad word that we talked about at the beginning. Something that most churches, again, never talk about, and it's very controversial. Oh, there it is. Masturbation. Masturbation. How many of us have ever heard a Bible study on masturbation? One. Guys, there's like 20 people in this room, online viewers. One person. One person. And we need to be clear on this topic because it too is quietly killed. Off the bat, we need to be perfectly honest, guys, and say this. The Bible does not condemn masturbation anywhere in the New Testament. Period. Full stop. And those who say it's always a sin present a case. Although in my opinion, it's a very weak case. They would point out two portions of text. One is in Genesis 38, where there's a man named Onan, and he's having sex. And he decides to pull out and ejaculate on the floor. I'm sorry, guys, it's that kind of message. We're going to use those words. Critics see this and say that is masturbation because he didn't finish in the woman. Let's go over the context of the story. Number one, a problem with that observation. That would also make contraceptives a sin, which again, many of these people do not argue it is. Number two, the context of the story matters. In Genesis 38, the sin named was that he was withholding a son from the woman he was sleeping with. In this chapter, and again, weird old traditions, a woman is married to a man, the man dies. She has no sons, no heirs. So the brother-in-law is told, sleep with her, give her an heir, so that the family line may continue there. Weird thing to do, off the bat, okay? And this man, Onan, goes, I don't want to because I want the stuff. If there's no heir, it goes to the next of kin. That's me. So he does this action. This is not speaking about masturbation. This is speaking about greed. The other scripture used is Leviticus 15. Leviticus 15 verse 2 says this, speak to the Israelites and say to them, when any man has an unusual bodily discharge, such a discharge is unclean. And this chapter goes on to talk about the facts that his bed is unclean, that his clothes are unclean. It's oddly specific that it includes that if someone else is hit with the ejection, or what is ejected, they are also unclean. I don't know when friendly fire would occur, but if it's a wet dream, you're unclean. Your horse is unclean. Everything's unclean. You are to wash yourself. You're supposed to go into the temple, offer up 2 doves. One is a thanksgiving offering, one to be burnt as a sin offering. And people go, see, it's a sin. This is why it's wrong. However, this chapter goes on to talk about the facts that not only is everything he touches wrong, there's other things that can make somebody unclean. The last 2 verses of this chapter say this. These are the regulations for a man with a discharge. It continues on. For anyone made unclean by an emission of semen. For a woman in her monthly period. Whoa! We have taken a turn. And for a man or a woman with a discharge. And for a man who has sexual relations with a woman who is ceremonially unclean. Let me ask you guys. If masturbation is called a sin due to this portion of Scripture, isn't also menstruation? Isn't also having sex? Isn't also a wet dream? Because again, that's not voluntary. That's not you lusting after someone and then deciding to make a wrong choice. That is not something you chose to do. Is that a sin when you did not willfully do anything? Does God hold us accountable for accidental sins? If someone's in a coma, can they sin? No, absolutely not. This is speaking about ceremonial law, as if Leviticus didn't give it away. All right? Not all of Leviticus is ceremonial law, but this is speaking about being ceremonially cleansed. Okay? It was saying, don't come into the temple wearing something that you hit. All right? God is holier than that. Saying, clean yourself up, wash yourself up before you come before God. There was a lot of ceremonial cleansings that were supposed to take place before you came before God. Because it's not a sin to have sex with your spouse. It's not a sin for a woman to menstruate. It's not a sin for you to have a wet dream. So, this leaves us with a question. Can masturbation ever be helpful rather than harmful? Let me give you an example. For those of you who are not aware, let's see if we're going to go somewhere helpful or wrong here. No, I'm just going to go back to the same graphics. That's the last one. For those of you who are not married, who have not had children, which again, I think everyone in this room, when you get pregnant, if you get pregnant, if God decides to give you a child as a couple, and your wife/you, women, have a child, that child comes out of somewhere in your body and does a lot of damage. Nurse, if I may ask, where do they come from? Your vagina. What else is that used for? Sex, correct. There's a lot of damage that happens, and you're supposed to take about a 6-week sabbatical from doing the dirty. At least. Depending on the damage. Ladies, stitches can happen down there. Other things. It's not a fun time. I don't know if all of you know this. I have 3 children. This is not academic. It's a hardship. Okay? 6 weeks at least go by where your wife is out of commission. Do you know what the worst time to ask your wife for a sexual favor is? When she just had a baby. You don't do that. You don't walk around and go, hey, honey, can you take a time out from sleeping and bleeding and breastfeeding to just, give me a BJ? I'm really struggling here, honey. You don't do that. Why? She's way more important than you are in that moment. The baby's way more important than you are. I'm sorry that I'm being graphic, guys. This is the only way we can do this, okay? Someone has to speak clearly about this. And during that time, you're not sleeping a ton. Especially if it's your first child, because every 10 seconds you have to make sure that their chest is moving. And babies take really shallow, quick breaths, so you can't see. It's really hard. And as a father who had a first child, you wake them up so many times. Make sure they're alive. They're sleeping on their back, everything's right, but you just want to be sure. And then guess what? You get less sleep. You get less sleep. In addition to that, you've never been so stressed. You've never had such real danger so close to you. In addition to that, guys, babies constantly demand things. You're under a lot of pressure, and the question that keeps running through your head is, how did I leave the hospital with this thing? Do they know that I don't know anything? Because you're out of your comfort zone. You're constantly stressed, okay? Who knows a really big reason as to why people choose to watch porn and masturbate to it? It's because you get a dopamine drop. A lot of kids who go through trauma early in their lives learn to use this to cope. A lot of us who watch porn and masturbate to it use this after bad days, hard days, as a control mechanism to cope. Do you know when this comes in most powerfully in your life? When you are stressed, tired, overmatched. When your spouse needs so many things that you don't know how to do. Gentlemen, this is the hardest time to remain sexually pure, in my opinion. Again, lusting after your spouse is not wrong. Lusting after your wife is not wrong. And if the Bible does not directly condemn masturbation, I cannot tell you guys that biblically that is wrong. I can tell you that it is irresponsible in some ways, but I cannot tell you that this is wrong. Another scenario that comes out is the idea of a soldier who's been married and is away on a deployment. There's very few choices as to what that person is going to do in a time of intense stress and pressure and life or death consequences. Okay? I do not believe that an alternative of watching porn, sleeping with someone who's not your wife, other things are a good or more laudable course of action. Okay? What we need to understand is that lust should not be mixed with masturbation when it's not for your wife, right? It should also not be in control of your life. Masturbation can be habit-forming and addictive. It also should not be used to dishonor your spouse, to end up withholding yourself from your spouse because you're going to win the fights. If it does push against these guidelines, then you absolutely know that it's wrong in your life. But if it does not, we can't biblically say that it is 100% a sin. Again, I would caution you all that this is not an advisable action. If you need to get rid of lust, if you're detoxing from lust that has been unhealthy, if you have been hooked on porn or reading smut or anything else, your mind will not be able to separate lust from release. In addition to that, some people find this to only be a slippery slope towards lusts. So it is not a tool that they can use. And you should know that before you do this yourself, before you give yourself permission, you need to ask these questions. And if you're married, you need to have a very serious conversation with your spouse. This should not be something that's kept on the DL. This is not something that you keep hidden in your life. However, to call masturbation outright a sin is intellectually and biblically dishonest, meaning that we have to classify masturbation not always as a sin, but as a liberty. Not everyone in this room is called to drinking. Not everyone can handle it. My bloodlines are abusive drunks. I'm not going to take that chance with my wife. I'm not going to take that chance as a Christian or as a pastor. Yet, for some people, they can have a glass of wine with a steak. This is not for everyone. And even for those who feel like it can be for them, this should be something that is taken as prayerful, right? You should be praying about how much and when and why. But the danger in this is that it can also become just a source of shame or outside condemnation. And that is not what it's supposed to be either, okay? For some of us, guys, our story is not lusting turning into masturbation. For some of us, we are victims of abuse. For some of us, we went through lifestyles that were outside of our control, and masturbation at a very young age became a coping mechanism. I'm not sharing my testimony, this is just truth. If you believe that that is inherently something that separates you from God, you are going to devalue yourself. You're going to see yourself as damaged goods when the Bible never says that you are. You're going to see yourself as someone who is not worthy of someone who's a real Christian, some of us, okay? We cannot take something that is extra biblical, hold it over our lives, and speak into it that because of this one thing that happened, especially if it was at a tender age, especially if it was not connected to pornography or other things, that we are dirtied, okay? Let's recap a little bit here. The heart of this message is not to be as shocking as possible. The heart of this message is to be clear and biblical. The heart of this message is to see you guys live in health, okay? I don't want you guys to be statistics that are addicted to porn, and at the same time, I don't want you to be statistics that got into marriages where you never had a conversation about sex before you put a ring on it. I don't want you to be a statistic where you got married and both of you live years feeling like you're the problem as to why your partner is not sexually fulfilled. I don't want you to get into marriages where you feel overmatched by even the concept of being physically intimate, which is supposed to be a beautiful thing. I want you guys to understand what is true and what is false here so that you can live your lives trying to dedicate this part of yourself to God towards bringing Him glory. Okay? Cade, can I ask you a favor? Could be any Cade live stream. Can you stop the live stream for me? Thank you. Those watching online, we're going to end here. That's all I had to say. If you guys do have questions, you can always DM our Instagram page, email us on our website, or if you're brave enough, drop a comment below. Maybe hide your name.